Hello, everyone. No, everyone's just showing up. All right. Is everyone muted?
Nope, I can hear you just fine. Benita's muted. Brittany's muted. Kimberly's muted.
What's wrong? Why are you sad? Oh, okay. Hey, do you want to use the bathroom? No.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I cannot hear you. This is the problem. All right, hold on.
Are you able to hear me, Dr. King?
I don't think Dr. King can hear us, but we can hear each other.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Hear me?
Can y'all hear me?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you, Benita.
Okay.
All right. Well, just a second. I'm going to stop the screen share so I can figure out. I want to be able to see you guys while I'm sharing the screen. Okay, I got it. Okay, can everyone see the PowerPoint? Okay. How's everyone doing tonight?
Awesome.
Good. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in, and I may ask for some participation as we go along. Are you guys muting yourselves, or is there something wrong on my end?
We mute ourselves, I think. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. It's just for a while I couldn't hear any of you, and so I knew that was a problem. So do what you need to do throughout the class. I know some of you are busy and have things going on. But we're going to go ahead and jump right in. We're going to cover Chapter 7 and Chapter 8 today. So we're going to talk a little bit about the process of family therapy, the structure, and also some couples counseling related things in Chapter 8. So let's just jump right in. So what we'll cover today are common factors that are a part of therapy with families, stressors and enhancers for counselors, the battle for structure, an initiative, and that's a typo there, sorry about that, and what beginning counselors over or underemphasize, and the stages of therapy. So as we kind of get started here, are there things that you have concerns about working with families? Any of you?
I'm a little bit worried because it's so many people to manage versus couples counseling is just two people, so you can kind of do mediation, conflict resolution. But family therapy has so many different people, and I'm a little bit worried about, personally, obviously I wouldn't show it professionally, but kind of being on somebody's side. Like if I saw that somebody was really always the scapegoat, it'd be hard to not want to jump in and protect them, especially if it was a child.
Yeah. I think you make a really good point, and I think that's one of the biggest things that especially beginning family therapists struggle with, but I would guess that even very seasoned family therapists have a hard time. It's not even just about your own personal biases or values, or it can be if it's connected to something that's happening in the session, but it can be very tough to not get roped into the family dynamic. So if there's someone who's particularly charming or taking control, it can be easy to want to please them and get sucked into that. But then it can also be, like you said, maybe you over-identify with one member of the family that's being scapegoated or clearly, targeted in some way. But I do think it's good to notice that and therapeutically bring it to the fore. But it can be challenging. And there's just a lot of bodies in the room. So that part can be challenging as well. But even if you're just working with couples, the dynamic is often explosive, and you have to manage a lot of personalities. So that can be tough. Anything else, you guys?
Going off of what Benita was saying, same as far as the number, there being a large number and giving each member the attention that they need, or acknowledging them all specifically and equally. To me, I think that would be difficult or maybe even overwhelming. Usually one person can dominate. They have the power. And so that one person will naturally want to speak for everybody else. And so trying to make sure that each individual gets to have their say and their share, and make sure that they feel paid attention to during that session. I think that it's important, but it would be difficult to make sure that every single time that happens for every single person.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's easy, like we mentioned, they often recreate their family dynamics in the room. And so if there's one person that's used to kind of being left out, as a therapist, you're going to want to connect that person, but that can be challenging. Yeah. Are there any, what do you look forward to, or is there anything that you think would be great about working with families?
I think it's like more in depth than just regular counseling, because I think that's beneficial, and you'll probably see more lasting effects because you're actually working on like a unit system that does carry over into their actual lives. Whereas in regular counseling, we're just seeing one person and helping them, but they go back home to the exact same situation. So it's harder that way, but this way it'll be helpful to have them go home with the same unit that worked on the same thing.
You make a really great point there. I worked in community mental health rehabilitation, and I worked primarily with the children, but I was lucky enough to work with them in school and in their homes, so that not only do you have a better perspective about what they're coming from, particularly with children, because they're not always going to tell you, because they don't always have the vocabulary to tell you. But also you have the ability to affect change in the family system, like you just said. So I think you make a really great point there. The other thing I really like about it is when you're working with couples, it takes about 5 minutes to figure out all of the stuff, right? Because it might take, 3 to 5 sessions for you to pick up on something about a person, an individual per se, that you're going to probably get in the first session with a couple, because they'll throw each other under the bus immediately. And that's not always a bad thing. That's a good thing because you get so much more information out. And there's a lot of honesty. And in that way, you can kind of work very quickly in a way that you can't as much with individuals. And it's not that individuals are trying to be, it's not that they're trying to be deceitful. It's just that we don't always have insight into our own behaviors as much. So, or as readily available on the surface as maybe a partner or a family member might. So, okay, well, let's move along. So some of the common curative factors in working with families are 40% extra therapeutic, 30% the counseling relationship, 15% expectancy, hope, and placebo, and 15% of your theory, technique, and approach. Is this surprising at all? I mean, I know when I read this, what surprised me was the fact that 40% of the change that occurs in therapy is about stuff that happens outside of the therapy room. Just fate, the good things that happen to the family or the positive changes that might occur. So I thought that was interesting and a little surprising. It also takes the pressure off a little bit as a family therapist, because I think these statistics are humbling because it makes us realize that we are not miracle workers. We're not the be all and end all for families. We are there to help and guide and, be a positive therapeutic presence, maybe help restructure environmental stressors, but we can't fix their lives, and that's not our role. Our role is not to fix people. And I also thought that the second point about the counseling relationship was very comforting as well. So you don't have to be perfect at wrangling personalities or knowing all of the things that you think that you need to know and providing wisdom to a family. You can have a positive relationship with the members of the family and help them and, apply your theory and try to help them with restructuring or whatever it is that they might need. But it's not all on you. About 70% of it has nothing to do with you. How does that make y'all feel? Benita's smiling.
I feel like it's actually helpful that it doesn't completely fall on you. Like, it involves kind of everyone, and the fact that 15% is just them wanting it to work. So them wanting to be there is already part of the help. So it takes off a lot of the pressure of, am I doing everything that I need to be doing, or am I helping in a way that I should be helping?
Absolutely.
So it's less pressure knowing that, it's not all about you.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is helpful. So, all right, just let's go ahead and move forward unless anyone else has anything they want to share about that. Okay. Okay, so what do you think some important characteristics of family counselors might be?
As your last slide pointed out, empathy and a decent connection with the family makes up 30% of your counseling interaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so important that they trust you, and they will trust you if you're authentic and genuine and empathetic and building relationships. All right, so some of the things that the book say are people who might struggle with this, with being a family therapist, are people who obviously don't want to do it, who might have some very deeply entrenched notions about what a family should be, and an inability to kind of bracket those ideas and withhold biases, or those that struggle with structure. Because as we mentioned before, it is so different from individual counseling. And while you have to be able to provide structure in an individual counseling session, it's a lot easier to rein in one person than it is 5. And so that can be legitimately challenging for some people, and that's okay. But you probably want to get good at it because it'll get overwhelming really fast. Which is why the next one says they need to be great jugglers. And then obviously counselors need to be self-aware, with a desire to help, and intuitive and feeling oriented. So being able to pick up on all of those nonverbals, noticing when someone starts to change their body language, maybe they slink into a corner and stop talking, or start to cause a distraction because that's the role that they've played for so long. Noticing all those patterns is a really important part of being an effective family therapist. So now we get to share what strengths do you think might make you a good therapist, and what weaknesses do you think you might need to be aware of?
No.
Hi, Sarah.
I'm an awesome juggler.
Oh, good. Like, really? You can juggle?
No, I cannot juggle. As in, like, bowling pins or hacky sacks. No, I can't juggle like that. But I can juggle tasks, people, horrible situations, crisis.
Okay. Well, good. That will serve you well, for sure. Yeah, I think, and that's something that can be set from the very beginning, with your intake and your process. If you have an organized, well thought out way of approaching families, then that can set the tone in a positive way too. Anyone have any weaknesses that they can think of that might be that they might need to overcome if they want to work with families?
Well, if I'm going to do a strength, I might as well do a weakness. I really have no clue what an awesome family looks like. I have spent my entire life functioning in a dysfunctional family environment. So my weakness would probably be that I identify better with dysfunction than I would functional.
Wow. So for you, it sounds like you would have to do a lot of self-exploration and studying.
Oh, I self-explore every day, all day long.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that does happen a lot in this class too, or it did for me. I was able to really compare and contrast where I came from and kind of figure out my role in some of the dysfunction, and therefore it kind of gives you a better idea of what we're shooting for. But you're right, it's also confusing because
like you said earlier with the children, when you worked with children, it takes a while for children to express to you, even if they have words. But if they have words and they're children and you've spent your entire tiny little life in this situation, that for you is a good situation. That for you is normal. And when you look at your friends who are in an even worse situation, you say things like, hey, I've got a good family. My daddy never touches me, So it makes your opinions and ideas of what would be functional very distorted.
Absolutely. And often it's not about what we're reading in the text, which is what makes it even more complicated, because sometimes you're working with families that are so far from that mark that's not even realistic. And so you're maybe shooting for more tangible goals. That are
One day of no beatings, just one day.
well, no. That
That would be a tangible mark for some. Just one day of nobody
but they would
being.
they would be removed from the home before that happened. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it is just about setting very simple, very realistic goals, as opposed to let's shift the entire system. But sometimes one goal at a time, we can start to move in a direction that's a little bit healthier and a little better. But I think that you make a really good point. It is so hard. And it takes a lot of self-analysis to understand where you came from, understand what about that was healthy, what about that was unhealthy, what was functional, what was dysfunctional, what you would have liked to have differently. And then let that go and not impose your values, beliefs, and history on the people in the room. And then you have a textbook ideal that's not quite reality. And then you have culture. So there are so many different factors that go into working with families, which is why it's so good that 70% of this just isn't even about us. Well, I guess some of it is. The relationship part is. But again, it can also just be about what does the family want to change and how can we help? And how can we point out some things that could be changed that could help them function in a different way that could be a little bit better for them? Okay. So some stressors and enhancers of being a family therapist could include having unrealistic expectations about one's own family or relationship, being exhausted by the time you get home from working with families all day to manage your own family, or having empathy overload. And as with individual counseling, a lot of the time, therapists need to go to their own therapy in order to process through some disturbing things that may have happened, or just to deal with compassion fatigue. But some of the good things are that we're all learning about what could be healthier, or we have a deeper understanding of where we came from and maybe some communication patterns we'd like to change. And you have better tools to solve your own family problems. So that's a positive. Some of the problems of beginning therapists are managing content versus process. So a lot with family therapy in the assessment phase, but also just throughout the process, you're wanting to focus on the process itself, the patterns that the families bring in, and not as much of a focus on the actual content, although it's important. So you have to find the right balance. It can get easy to just listen, okay, child number 1, child number 2, mom, dad, sister, aunt, grandma, let's hear everybody's story. And you've missed what's happening in the room, the nonverbals, and how they interact with each other. So that can be a challenge. It's also important to try to understand the how. How do things happen in the home? How do individuals interact with one another, in addition to asking the content-related questions? A big problem is trying to make everyone happy. I know I've fallen into this trap before. Not going to happen with families all the time. So that kind of comes from that belief that if the therapists were competent enough, then everything would work out really well. And that can also come from just the shock of feeling overwhelmed with all the people in the room as well. So yeah, we'll keep going. So let's talk about some of the things that therapists can overemphasize and underemphasize in therapy. One is overemphasizing verbiage. So you don't have to have the right words to say all the time. there can be a lot of pressure on the family therapist because you're the leader in the room and you're attempting to manage possible fighting or people talking over each other, or maybe people not sharing at all, which is a lot to juggle again. So you don't have to have the right things to say all the time. You're also giving them homework, you're reflecting feelings, and you're looking at patterns. The other thing to avoid is too early or too easy a resolution. So that placebo effect can come on pretty strong. And if they are really excited to get the help that they need, sometimes they will rush into a solution, or you can rush into a solution. But we don't want to fix things too quickly because that's not realistic. And we also want to be mindful of scapegoating. If the therapist buys into the scapegoating pattern, then the family's just repeating the exact same patterns that they've engaged in for a long time. Some of the things that therapists underemphasize is the importance of setting a structure. Setting a structure is probably one of the most important things that the therapist can do. If they can set the structure, the pace, and the nature of the therapeutic relationship from the beginning, then you're setting your family up for success. Even setting rules like no criticism, or no name calling, or different things like that can help change the communication patterns in the room, even just for the session. And that can help, the therapist be more productive during that time. You also need to emphasize informed consent. So again, structured therapy fees, rules. You also really want to set up your informed consent issues related to confidentiality and disclosure. So keeping secrets in family therapy can be really detrimental. So if, the very classic case is if someone's having an affair and then they come to you and they say, I'm having an affair, but don't tell my husband or my wife yet. That's a big ticking time bomb. So you want to make sure that you've explained the limits to confidentiality in the family setting. And then you want to set up your space in a way that's conducive to therapy. So plan for the family. Maybe have some toys for the children, or seating that's comfortable for everyone so that you're not trying to cram someone in a rushed, unprepared way. Again, we're going to focus on our therapeutic presence because that's about 30% of what makes things effective in counseling. And so the solar method is facing the family squarely with an open posture and crossed legs, leaning toward the family, eye contact and relaxation. So those are all just your basic skills that you learn when you start working with clients. But what kind of Benita mentioned earlier about she was worried that if you fail to engage with a certain family member or over-engaging the loudest member, then that can shift the balance or make it unbalanced rather. And the battle for initiative. So we talked about that 15% placebo effect. We want to make sure that the family is buying into the therapeutic process, because if they come in without hope, then they're not going to be motivated to change. And you cannot be motivated for them. They have to be motivated themselves. So if you can sell the family on a set of possibilities and help them imagine how their life could be different, that can help. And obviously we need to attend to nonverbal behavior. So setting the structure can happen from the very beginning, from the first phone call, from the intake, having an organized, friendly first impression. And some of that stuff is just, running a business 101, but obviously you want to be courteous and organized and help the families have a good first impression. And then if you have the opportunity, evaluate the intake information before. I always sent out my intakes before. I had a therapy system that helped me. And so I could get all the paperwork done, so we didn't waste a bunch of time in our first session filling out paperwork, but also I had the ability to review and prepare myself for what might be walking through the door. So that's very helpful too. So the first part of therapy is rapport building, creating a therapeutic alliance, assessing the opinions of each family member and looking for patterns, subsystems and triangles, and then modeling effective communication. The middle phase is reorientation and change. So helping families become aware of their patterns and helping them change patterns that no longer serve them. This is where you're really working on and setting your goals. And changes in beliefs, values, structure, organization, and behavior and power can occur. Families can try on new roles in non-threatening ways through homework, role play, therapist modeling, and practice. And the therapist will want to look for evidence of change and reinforce the change at this point, and connect with families with resources and outside support. You also want to focus on the strengths of families. And then, just 1 second, sorry. It's too warm in my house, so my apologies. And then there's the termination phase. So you've noticed that the family's worked hard for many weeks and changes are occurring, and they're bringing new patterns into their daily lives. And the therapist can focus on the strengths and reiterates and encourages the changes that have already occurred. And you're going to plan a termination date with the option to come back if necessary. So the 4-step process of termination is orientation, so letting them know that termination will occur. Summarization, explaining, going over what the family has done in terms of goals and changes that have been made. Discussion of long-term goals, and then a follow-up can be after the termination has occurred. And then termination day can be celebrated by, really just celebrating the accomplishments that the family's made, by praising them for their changes and growth. All right, so that's chapter 7 in a nutshell, and I kind of flew through it. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions about the process? Because I know that we kind of flew through it, and this is a very general approach. I mean, obviously, depending on your model, different theories have different lengths of time. Sorry, did someone say something? Okay. I was just going to say that different models and approaches to therapy are different lengths of time. And so this is just kind of like a general approach to the process of being available and helping. So I'm going to exit out of that. And I'm going to pull up my second PowerPoint, which is on couples counseling, which I think is a lot more exciting, actually. All right. Go ahead and share this. All right. Can I move this? Yes, I can. Okay. All right, so some of the goal of couples counseling, so we have a variety of different kinds of couples counseling. We have couples and marriage therapy, which the goal is to increase communication and improve the relationship of the couple. And we have premarital counseling, so preventing some problems that may emerge in marriage, setting realistic expectation, and enhancing the relationship. Can you guys think of other types of couples counseling that might occur, or types of therapy related to couples?
Oh yeah, they have all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
special retreats for couples, and
Yes. Yeah.
emotional building therapy.
Hi everyone. I just want to say hi because I just saw Jen. And I haven't said hi to Tana or Sarah or Marissa. So hi guys. And sorry, Jean, I didn't mean to
No, you're fine.
cut you off, but you're right. They have so many different types of relationship building workshops and skill building retreats. You're right.
And they don't, that's not even covering the fruity sort of unusual alternative stuff that's out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there are, religious based workshops and things. There's also like the traditional counseling. There's some preventative and pre-marriage types of counseling. There's also, unfortunately, divorce counseling or counseling with couples on how to co-parent. So at a variety of different stages in, the relationship or the dissolution of the relationship.
I mean, I don't know if this counts, but they even have, the celebrity marriage boot camp on TV, which I don't really watch, but I've seen it. So I don't know how serious that is, but.
What is it?
Oh, that's that one where like Kendra and one of her basketball player husbands were in.
Yes. So they take celebrities.
Yeah, it's like a reality train wreck of a marriage.
Yeah.
What if
I've seen the episode and I don't really know. I mean, they do some kind of, I don't know. Jean, do you know of I don't know. They did one where they have like the husband or this wife laying in like a casket and you have to imagine that,
I didn't see that one. I saw like an episode where Kendra was throwing crap at her husband, and I believe it was the basketball player she was married to at the time. And I thought that's too much of a train wreck for me. I can't go there. I'm going to go back to Anna Nicole Smith or somebody.
Yeah, she's much less of a train wreck.
Absolutely.
Well, and with all of these different,
so I don't know, but there's that. I mean, that
Married at First Sight. I wonder if they have counseling on that show.
I haven't seen that. I've been wondering about that. I see the title for the Married at First Sight, but I like to work with a diverse population, like religious diversity, Islam, things like that, where they actually have prearranged marriages. I mean, you've met them a couple of times, but they don't have relationships like, say, we would.
Well, and I think you make a really interesting point there, because a lot of the Prepare Enrich kind of preventative programs are very much rooted in a Western view of marriage and set of ideals and communication patterns and styles that definitely does not apply to what you're talking about, like an arranged situation. And I don't know, but maybe there is, marriage or premarital counseling for, Islam or a variety of different cultures that maybe do engage in.
Well, as far as Judaism is concerned, yeah, you have to go to, it's not necessarily counseling, but it's prep courses before you get married. Mm-hmm. It's almost like converting to Catholicism. You basically go to classes to make for sure that you're not two dodos doing the wrong thing with unrealistic impressions of what marriage and life will be like.
Well, and I think that, there is a solid, I think it's probably a good idea to talk through some communication issues that could happen before being married.
In my relationships class that I did in undergrad, they said that people who had arranged marriages during not at first, but after so many years of marriage, they surveyed as having happier marriages than people who married for love. So I don't know what survey she was looking at, but we talked about that at one point.
That's really interesting. It makes me think of I can't remember his name, but there's some research out there. I want to say his name is Dan something. And basically, he found that in his research that once you fully commit to something, you are happier with that result. And that people who make those types of like full all-in decisions end up deciding that their choice was the better choice. And I think his research had to do with like even just choosing paintings. Like if given the option to return the painting in a couple days, people were less satisfied than if they had to make the decision right then. And then they did follow up, and the people were a lot happier when they had to make the decision, as opposed to if they always had the ability to get out or make a different choice. And he said that his research was so compelling that he decided to marry his girlfriend because research was supporting that. So, and he says that he's happier now. So that's kind of, it kind of goes along with what you're saying, Sarah. That's very interesting.
It converted at least one guy.
I would hope so. He was in charge of the research. So
we have an extremely unusual view in the United States about love and marriage and commitment as opposed to the rest of the world. Ours is more like Hollywood, and the rest of the world has something more akin to reality. Our expectations are outrageous.
Well, what do you guys think about that? You think people are asking for too much from their partnerships? And is that what I'm hearing you say, that people want too much from their relationships and so they're not committing to their relationships?
We have an unrealistic expectation. We have this belief in happily ever after, once upon a time, and love that a lot of other societies don't have. They enter into relationships based on economics, respect, religious belief, background, a lack of options, an expectation from family and culture and society. Whereas we're raised on Disney, and we're all princesses find Prince Charming.
The Disney effect.
I do connect with that because as feeling oriented as I am, I try to not let my emotions dictate like my mood or how I feel about somebody, whether it be a friend or my husband or whatever. And I was listening to the radio even just this morning, and they were talking about how in their marriage they've had to remember that love isn't like a good feeling all the time. But we expect to feel that I'm in love all the time, every day. And when I don't, there's something wrong. But we hit highs and lows, and we have to work through that. It's not just feeling oriented or just feeling driven. And so I think we are raised on this belief that there is happily ever after, and we'll always be in love. And if you find your true love, and we emphasize the feeling of it and not the decision and the commitment and the action of it.
Yeah, I like the phrase love is a verb, not a feeling. Something you do. That's interesting. Anyone else have any perspectives on kind of where marriage has shifted, at least in our Western society? How it's shifted or how that can impact our counseling?
Well, if you're born in a once upon a time society where you believe that every Prince Charming is out there, I mean, that's obviously going to affect the way that you approach counseling and your expectations for the outcomes of counseling. I mean, we come predisposed. We are packaged here, raised here, bred here. Our mothers, we watched them, our fathers. So we have that predisposition to disposable marriage and, once upon a time and I should never ever gain a pound even after menopause. You know, that's our philosophy.
Right. So,
Or after childbirth.
Yeah. I will get back into those jeans.
so how does this impact us?
I agree with Jean that, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, you know, even 20 years ago, when you got married, the plan was to grow old together. But society, I guess as society's emotional process has gone through, and as Jean says, marriages have become disposable, that you have like a starter marriage, and then you have a raise the kids marriage, and then you have a retirement marriage, and each of those, and it's almost like the attitude is each of those is to serve a specific purpose, and so I guess when you have a couple coming in, it's really important to know what their perspective is on marriage, what their background is, why they went into it, what was the end goal that they had in sight, and why are they still kind of hanging on. Because you can have somebody who's in there, and by hook or by crook, they have loyalty to the max, and they've got the kids all involved, and they will go through hell. Even if they can't find heaven, they'll walk through hell. For that principle of you stick with it. And you may have the other person that was like, you know what, but this is all about me. If I'm not true to me, and I don't like this, so I have to be true to me first, and doesn't want any part of, they're ready to leave their kids and let their husband raise their kids. They're ready to just be focused on them. And it's about understanding their backgrounds and how to help them see each other and see a possible future for the marriage or not.
Yeah, it's complicated. Because I'm thinking if one partner has that perspective and the other one doesn't, what's the goal?
Yeah. Like, why stick together?
Or yeah, it's about like you said, trying to find out where each one's coming from, and then are you going to stick it out or not? So that can be tough.
Well, research right now is even showing that they've devalued marriage and commitment, and most of the younger generations are opting not to even go through the rituals of marriage and the legalization and just living together, raising kids together without the hassle of changing your name and getting legalized and going through the process.
I think we have more and more of that, and more single unmarried women than ever before.
The single fathers, where the moms are just taking off and dads are now raising kids. We are actually closing the gap in gender.
But yeah, I mean.
Yeah. And more than ever, I've seen a bunch of single moms that have even adopted. They're like, I don't want to deal with a man that has say over my kids. So I have a bunch of friends that are single moms that are career oriented that said, I want children and I don't want to have to deal with a husband and his issues and what he has to say over my kids. And so they just adopt straight up by themselves.
So wide variety of families. So that can definitely change the type of therapy that's happening in the room. So, I'll just fly through this slide because it just kind of goes over the wide variety of types of counseling that are available. And then there's pre and post marital counseling, all those different skills programs we talked about. And then there are quite a few marriage and family therapists. Some of them that are highlighted in this book are Susan Johnson, Richard Stewart, Frank DiTilio, Albert Ellis, and Robert Lieberman. Of course, you can apply almost any theory to family systems therapy. And some of I can't see my top of my slide here, but some of the things that they work through are crisis, communication, financial issues, and infidelity. So those are some of the biggest drivers that get people into couples counseling. All right, so let's talk a little bit about John Gottman. He is a pretty interesting researcher who has done so much on the study of couples and relationships and what keeps people together and what works. Have you guys heard of him before?
I almost went to one of his retreats in Seattle with my husband.
Really?
Yeah. They're really expensive, though.
I would imagine. I have used his research with couples more than anything else. It's really good stuff. He can predict with over 90% accuracy whether or not someone will divorce by analyzing an interaction in the Love Lab. So he basically sets them up and does research on them and lets them work through a variety of issues. And he created a coding system to look at their microaggressions, their tone of voice, the way that they speak to one another. He measures their physiology, their blood pressure, levels of cortisol, all sorts of different things. And he studied, couples since the 70s. So some of the interesting things that he found are that 67% of new parents experience decreased relationship satisfaction in the first 3 years of a child's life. Surprise, surprise, right? That's tough. And that it can be really tough to kind of stick through that period. Couples who do last have ratios of 5 to 1 of positive to negative interactions in conflict situations. What do you guys think about that one? So it's not just like 5 to 1 all the time, positive to negative, but during the high conflict times. So it's a way.
This guy did all the research. He's already proved it.
Right.
We don't actually have to have an opinion on this. He's already shown us that with 90% accuracy, he can tell you that if you fight 5 to 1, that you're going down the tubes. You need to find somebody else or change your ways.
Yeah, so it's not just about, I'm going to say 5 compliments today and then 1 negative thing. It's more about the way that you express your grievances with empathy and humor and affection and physical touch. And the couples who divorce have a ratio of 0.8 to 1. Positive to negative interactions. You can see that negative interactions really impact, during conflict, really impact the ability for couples to stay together. He also found that in heterosexual relationships, 80% of issues are brought up by women. Is that surprising?
No, not at all. Not even a little bit. That's why horses are called nags. My Indian name is 3 Horse.
What do y'all think that's about?
We're a vocal bunch of girls.
Why?
Because our mothers burned our bras and told us we could.
Well, it's also because you got to look at expectations. Male expectations of a marriage can be few, and female expectations of a marriage can be wide and vast.
Once again, Walt Disney. Where's that Prince Charming, and how come he got fat and his hair fell off?
Mm-hmm. And he doesn't listen to me and any of my emotions.
He never carries the trash out when I ask him to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any other ladies in here married want to talk about it?
I I think it is at least for my husband and I, it's definitely a personality thing. Like, he's just so relaxed and he communicates differently and his emotions are expressed more subtly, whereas I am confrontational. And if I have a problem, I want to talk about it now. And he's not really like that. He's more easygoing. He'll just let things roll. But it's just funny that we're talking about this because I said at work today that 9 times out of 10, if there is a conflict with us, at the end of the conflict, I can go, I probably overreacted to that, or I probably got upset because this happened earlier today. I can usually attach it to myself because I know how I respond. But I do think it's just a matter of how we communicate, how we feel. And I think women are, and I don't mean to be stereotypical, but women are, I think, more sensitive to our emotions and to having those emotional needs met. Whereas men, not as adamant about sitting down and talking about our feelings, I guess.
Well, scientifically, they've proven the woman's brain, when you got it under and you're looking at it, our brain is firing almost all the time, all of it. And we have one little spot up here that, is kind of off in the distance in La La Land. And for the most part, men's brains work in the opposite of ours. Theirs is all dark and dim, except for that one little spot that has a bright glimmer of light. So it's just like his statistics and research here, we do think differently. That's also why we're multitaskers and they're knuckle draggers.
I think I did read, and I can't speak to that research, but I think I did read something about how women are able to process emotion and utilize their cognitive resources and verbal resources in order to express all of it at the same time. Whereas, like you said, you're talking about multitasking. Whereas
we say like 25,000 words in a day and they say like 8.
But I think that sometimes they have to take a little longer to process because of some of those maybe brain differences. I'm not quoting any research here. But I also kind of wonder about socialization. Are we raised a little bit differently when it comes to emotions? Or socialized in society a little bit differently?
Yes.
Yes.
I grew up in a single parent home with a father that raised us instead of a female influence. If it's not broke and it's not bleeding and it's not blue, get up, shrug it off. If you're feeling bad, mow the yard. Nature and nurture come close, but there's a difference. So I can watch a couple fight and have a conflict. And sometimes it's so much easier for me to identify with the man in the conflict and see where he's coming from than it is for me to take her point of view.
That's a really interesting point that you just made. So because you were raised
devoid of female upbringing, and it was a man in a man's world who was a firefighter. He worked with men, we were around men, we were raised by men. So we're far more, my sister and I are far more in the masculine category and thinking that way. Because whether a parent likes to say it or not, you warp your child's mind from birth to think a way that you want them to think.
Well, and it's like a little girl starts crying and it's okay, but a little boy is often told,
suck it up. Mm-hmm. The words are suck it up.
Right.
That's what men do.
And so
they don't hug you. That's a mommy's job.
Process. They've learned to not process their emotions on some levels, and that's not everyone at all. That's certainly the stereotypical view. And I know you guys are great about qualifying your opinions and saying this is my experience, or I'm not sure why, but it seems like, and so that's certainly not always the case. But I do think there are some ways that differences in gender roles and how people are socialized that can lead to relationship problems later in life, for sure. So, Another interesting quote or the piece of research that he provides us with is that over time, emotional withdrawal and the absence of positive affect during arguments is a predictor of a divorce. So if there's a lot, okay, here we go. The 4 horsemen. If we see the 4 horsemen very early on in a relationship, then the marriages will fail pretty early, like first 5.6 years, he says. But if there's a slow build and just a lack of understanding, empathy, humor, compassion, affection, if there's emotional cutoff, then the marriage can end closer to the 16-year mark. So I'm going to show you guys just a little video, if my link will work. Hold on the 4 horsemen. Uh-oh. We don't want Zoom. I'm going to move this. Come on, internet.
You're so selfish.
What an idiot.
It's not my fault we're always late.
Forget it.
Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Dr. John Gottman calls these negative communication patterns the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse because they'll lead to the end of your relationship. In fact, he can predict this relationship failure with over 90% accuracy if the behavior isn't changed. So, what can you do? Well, at the Gottman Institute, we understand you might not even know you're communicating this way, or you might not know how to control it. But if you practice the following 4 research-based antidotes, there is hope for your future. Criticism attacks the character of the recipient instead of focusing on a specific behavior. The antidote to criticism is to talk about your feelings using I statements, then express a positive need. Contempt is an expression of superiority that comes out as sarcasm, cynicism, name-calling, eye-rolling, sneering, mockery, and hostile humor. Contempt is the greatest predictor of relationship failure and must be eliminated. The antidote to contempt is to treat one another with respect and build a culture of appreciation within the relationship. Defensiveness is self-protection through righteous indignation or playing the victim. Defensiveness never solves the problem and is really just an underhanded way of blaming your partner. The antidote to defensiveness is to accept responsibility, even if only for part of the conflict. Stonewalling occurs when the listener withdraws from the conversation without resolving anything. It takes time for the negativity created by the first 3 horsemen to result in stonewalling, but when it does, it can become a habit. The antidote to stonewalling is to break for at least 20 minutes, calm down, then return to the conversation. Spare your relationship from certain destruction. Learn more about eliminating the 4 horsemen by visiting our site.
Okay. So, have any of you heard of that before, the 4 horsemen?
Well, not necessarily in these contexts, but yeah. Usually the 4 horsemen are pestilence and war.
It's a biblical reference, I believe.
Oh yeah, it's a biblical reference.
So you guys haven't heard of it when it comes to relationships? Okay. I use this so much when I'm working with couples because it's so true. Defensiveness is one of the most common ones. And I think we do that almost as a knee-jerk reaction. We want to protect ourselves. And so it's just very easy to say, well, you didn't tell me that it was at 5:30, or, you know, I told you that I was going to pick up so-and-so before I got there. So it's really just about defending yourself and kind of popping off with that response when there's a conflict. And then we have criticism. And criticism is when you attack the person and not the action. So you never take the trash out. Instead, that's an attack on character, even though it doesn't seem like it. Or you never helped me out. I asked you to take out the trash, instead of hey babe, you forgot to take the trash out. Or you always forget to take the trash out. So instead of criticizing the behavior, you're criticizing the person. Contempt is when you take criticism just an extra step further with the eye rolling and disgust of the other person. This can happen after extended periods of disrespect or if changes aren't happening in the relationship. And then there's stonewalling, which is probably the most, I would say contempt and stonewalling are probably the most detrimental. And stonewalling is when people shut down completely and they won't deal with a problem because then everyone feels stuck and no one's moving forward. Any questions about this, or can anyone relate in their own lives?
Does stonewalling happen because they've tried? Isn't that typically, well, most times I've seen that or felt that in my own relationship. It's when it feels like, okay, I've tried this 10 million times and I get the same result 10 million times, so why am I trying?
It can.
I don't care. I just give up, whatever.
It
Yeah.
can be. It's, or when someone just refuses to engage or just doesn't say anything at all. That can be a pattern of communication. Some people have that style. They really do. They shut down. They can't hear it at all. And sometimes that could be from a trauma in the past and they've learned how to just completely basically dissociate. But you're right, it could be from total exhaustion, or it can come after they've been hit with criticism, contempt, defensiveness in the argument because they're so frustrated that they can't keep going in the conversation.
Because I've seen, at least with women, it's the only time they will shut down is when it seems like they're just like, because usually women were like, woo, we will get in there and we will be there till our dying day of I am right. Okay, well, at least men are just like, I am right. And we're just like,
I wish Curtis was here. I think he's the only man in our class.
But it seems like the only time we finally give up is when we're just like, when we stonewall. It seems like it's like, when we recognize a pattern, like, wait a minute, we've had this fight 10 million times. This is what it always ends up in. And I'm just not going to complete the pattern. It's not that you give up.
Definitely be that.
It's that I'm tired.
Yeah, it can be that. And then again, you kind of go to a place of not having hope, which then leads the relationship into a really bad direction. If you're giving up on trying to solve the problems, and that's different from saying we're not going to come to an agreement here and we need to pause. But if someone's trying to bring something up that's a legitimate concern and the other person just doesn't respond, that's stonewalling. And typically that happens. And like you said, that's a really good example. And what else did he find about stonewalling? I think I put it in here. By the time that someone's at the stonewalling level, apparently their cortisol levels are so high and their blood pressure is so high that they are not even functioning very well. Like they can't communicate very well anymore, at least in an argument situation. And then, so these are the 6 factors, according to Gottman, that lead to divorce. And these are, again, related to arguing. So harsh startup, the argument or marriage starts off poorly with criticism or contempt. So if people go in with those patterns of arguing, it's going to be tough. If they're just critical or contemptuous from the beginning in their relationships. Any of the 4 horsemen. Flooding. So the partner negativity is so harsh and intense that it leaves the partner shocked. So if the fighting is so harsh, it can leave someone just kind of floored and not really knowing how to even respond If the body language, so like body language meaning the physiological response, increased blood pressure, heart rate, and adrenaline secretion. Because remember, during his research, he was measuring all of that stuff. So he noticed the couples that were arguing in a way that was a little more positive, having empathy, humor, physical affection, or even just verbal affection. And they were comfortable with each other. They could kind of laugh. They had maybe a hand on the other person's leg, or they were holding hands. So it wasn't necessarily what they were fighting about. It was just the intensity of the fight. And then if there are lots of failed repair attempts, so attempts to turn the argument around, and then they can't. And bad memories. So strong couples can remember falling in love when things start out really well, and they glorify past struggles. And they say, you know, we got through all of this together. Look what we've done. And remember when we fell in love and it was so wonderful? That whole thing. Okay, so another very heavily, does anyone have questions about Gottman before we move on?
I don't understand how remembering falling in love and glorifying getting through past struggles, how does that lead to divorce?
Oh, it's the bad, so the people who don't have those strong memories. Sorry, I didn't write that very well. So the bad memory, so people who don't have positive nostalgia, or they can't think about the good times anymore. Okay. So Gottman's a really good one to look up and find resources from, because he's just got so much research and really useful stuff to help couples with. I mean, this was a big aha for me. And I think about this all the time in my relationships with other people, and not just romantic relationships, but anyone. You know, am I being critical? Am I criticizing the person and not the action? Am I being defensive right now when I don't need to be? Could I have more empathy in this interaction? So those are things that can help us. So we're moving on to Susan Johnson's emotionally focused therapy. And I've also added these articles. If I haven't, I need to check and make sure I have, to your chapter 8 modules. They're like all of these theories. There are so many approaches to couples therapy. I just chose these two because Susan Johnson's work is very heavily researched, as is John Gottman's. So
also these theories and these counselors are all over YouTube. They have hours of where they've had TED Talks and they present their theories and they do interactive teaching. They're absolutely all over YouTube if you haven't been there to look at this stuff.
Yeah, so check it out. I mean, I think information is power. And so her work is based on attachment theory, which was originally asserted by John Bowlby. He did research on monkeys and found that humans absolutely need love. And it's really basic, but just confirming this with research is kind of interesting, right? And that our early relationships impact our future relationships. And so if people have a secure attachment, meaning their needs were basically met when they were babies, they're going to have better, more effective neural pathways for managing conflicts, stress regulation, and they have basic trust in others that their needs will be met, and that people are good and that they are trying their hardest. So what Susan Johnson tries to do is help individuals understand their attachment, whether they have a secure or an insecure attachment. And she gives them tools to communicate their needs in a way that's less detrimental to the relationship. So she focuses on how partners process their emotional experiences and how they organize their interactions into patterns and cycles with each other. So just as I mentioned before, secure attachment is related to high self-esteem, an internal locus of self-control, extroversion, and openness. And they exhibit more empathy, humor, interest, and validation when they're in an argument than those with an insecure attachment. So it's a little tough for people who never chose this, who were born into maybe an environment that wasn't so wonderful, and because they're kind of set up for some tough communication patterns later in life. But the goal is to help them develop a healthier attachment style. And part of that is validating primary emotions and creating secure attachment bonds. So Kimberly, are you still here? Kimberly? Is she not here anymore?
I'm here.
Okay, I don't see you. You talked about this in, I think, Practicum the other night.
Yeah.
About primary emotions and helping people kind of uncover what their intentions really are, what the underlying feeling is. You guys practice some of this stuff?
Like with the client?
Like at Helen Therapy, do you use EFT or?
Oh, yes. Well, we kind of do. It's part of like with cognitive behavioral therapy, because a lot of times we have to kind of get down to the underlying emotions, and we use a lot of the techniques and things like that from cognitive behavioral therapy. And one of the main concepts is working with clients to get to their underlying emotions, so where they can help you know, express them in a healthy way, and also change their thought patterns based on those emotions. So they kind of change how they're processing it from like, oh, I'm angry or I'm frustrated, to put like actual responsibility on the actual emotion to communicate it more effectively.
Right. So I'm afraid you're going to leave me, instead of I'm mad at you for talking to that woman or something.
Exactly.
And so that's a lot of what Susan Johnson tries to do with people. She tries to help them understand their go-to responses and reactions, and she tries to help them uncover some of the deeper primary emotions that are underneath that. And then she teaches them how to express those primary emotions to their partner in a way that they will be understood with empathy instead of defensiveness. So obviously, if you say to your partner, I was feeling a little left out when you were talking to another woman instead of me, that's going to go over a little bit better than, how dare you talk to that witch, right? So if the partner can empathize with the feeling that the person has, then they'll want to reach out and reach toward. But if they're feeling shut down and slammed and attacked, then everyone loses. So it makes a lot of sense. And she uses a lot of experiential techniques aimed for increasing empathy and recognition of the partner's feelings. So the therapist's role in emotionally focused therapy is the disclosure of feelings and acceptance of feelings, helping the clients disclose and accept their feelings, helping them safely release emotions and find that awareness within themselves to try to understand what the deeper piece is to the puzzle, and encouraging empathic closeness from partners when the partner is disclosing. So encouraging bonding through experiential techniques. And the therapist is optimistic and growth focused. And there's a 3-stage process to this. Again, helping couples emotions that lie behind distancing behaviors and defensive expressions, withdrawal. Restructuring the interactional patterns, so learning new ways to get attachment needs met by changing the interactional pattern, and the consolidation and iteration of the therapy. So reviewing and reinforcing the changes that occurred. And so it actually, are you guys hearing feedback? Do you hear me twice? Oh, bummer. It's not doing it anymore, is it? All right, we're gonna go with that. So obviously I just gave you a skimmed overview version of this, but that's another person that I would highly recommend looking into her research, because it has been studied and proven to be an effective approach to working with families, so, or with couples specifically. So what questions do we have? Our thoughts, reflections? So these are, that's a humanistic approach, a little different than some of the others that we're going to be studying as we continue. Some of them are humanistic, but some of them are more behavioral, cognitive behaviorally focused. That's why it's interesting, Kimberly, hearing you say that, because it's almost like a fusion. Because to me, the CBT part is almost completely focused on the thoughts, the irrational thoughts that lead to the behaviors, or the behaviors that kind of impact the situation. But I like that you guys incorporate also the emotions, the emotional piece.
We kind of like work backwards almost from the behavior, and a lot of times it's a lot more than just the cognitive, because because they're having those thoughts. But like if you look at like just like the stages that they go through, there's obviously, before there's ever a behavior, there's an emotion behind that, and even those automatic thoughts are coming from somewhere. And a lot of times like anger or hurt kind of bring up those innate thoughts that are just like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so important, and it makes so much sense for us to think about where someone comes from and what their attachment was like with their caregivers when they were young, or the environment that they grew up in. Because we know, based on research, that in high stress areas and high stress schools, that children are a lot more reactive, and they have a harder time sometimes controlling their impulses. And you have to approach, working with traumatized children in a different way. And it's the same thing with adults. Traumatized adults sometimes don't have as an easily accessible go-to way of coping that is automatically healthy and empathetic and structured. What do you all think about that?
We're not that different from animals. If you beat a dog every day, when you reach for it, it'll bite you.
That's right.
So if you traumatize or abuse a human, depending on the circumstances, you're going to get a particular type of reaction.
And sometimes our brains don't know that they're not in the unsafe space anymore. So any type of startling effect or perceived criticism or any type of chaos or crisis that comes into the situation, which is almost always an argument or something, there's going to be conflict in a relationship. Someone who's had some bad experiences with attachment can have a harder time processing and reacting in an empathetic, humorous, affectionate way.
And it's not necessarily something that you can cure. It's more like a manageable condition.
Right.
You teach them new habits and a way to approach the situation, but they will always be very cognitive of the fact that they're having to go through particular emotions to behave in a way that is more conducive to a positive relationship.
Well, and I think that it can be so hard for everyone, even people who have not been in, and I think you're right, we all have patterns, right? Some of those patterns are positive and conducive and work well with relationships, and some of them are not. And almost all of us, well, actually all of us have patterns that are not wonderful, that come out, and they always come out in our most intimate, romantic committed, dedicated relationships, right?
Yes, because after a while you get comfortable and can't hide it anymore.
Right. So it can be about understanding what your go-to coping strategies are, maybe recognizing that they were useful for a time when you needed to protect yourself, and then letting go of some of those, or recognizing when it's happening and taking a breath and understanding, okay, I need to react in a different way. Regardless, it's a lot of work. But it can also be about understanding where your partner's coming from. Understanding that maybe if someone lashes out or responds in a certain way, that it's not about you or about anything having to do with your relationship. And then communicating your needs. Does anyone else have anything that they want to say about this? Because this is pretty much where I've ended my lecture for tonight. So I just chose those two, but there are so many approaches to working with couples. And the chapter gives kind of an overview of that. But we are about to dive into different theories. So each week you're going to be presenting on your different theories. How's everyone doing with your projects?
I just have a logistical question.
Sure.
What day are you going to post the presentation?
So I will post it the day after it's due.
Okay.
Although, unless you give it to me sooner, and then I already put yours in the module.
Oh, okay. But it'll be at the latest the day after the project is due.
Yes.
So we have time to watch.
You have the whole week to review it and look at it. I'm going to make sure that, unless something weird happens, and then we'll deal with it then. But yeah, I'm going to get those posted almost immediately.
Okay.
So that you guys have the whole week to look at them. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to intergenerational Bowen, a theoretical approach to counseling families, which is what I think we'll be doing a week or two. And is everyone doing okay overall in the class with the structure? Any questions about expectations?
Sorry, I forgot one thing about that. I think last time on our Zoom, we talked about you giving us some examples of the unessay project.
Oh yeah, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I will send that to you. Thank you for reminding me.
Thank you.
Was there something else too? Oh, I did want to review the, I sent this out. I changed the syllabus at the very beginning. The late paper policy has changed. So did everyone get that memo? It won't just be 5 points off a day. It'll be 5 points off the first day and then 25% off the total grade for each day after that. Okay? All righty. All right. Thank you for reminding me about that, Benita. Any more questions about the content we covered tonight? Nope. Okay. Well, then I will end the meeting. Have a great night, everyone. I'm so glad that you made it, and thank you for participating. It was a lot of fun. Thanks so much.
Dr. King?
Yes.
Could you stay on after everybody gets off? I have a question to ask you about my presentation because it's due on Monday.
Yes, but let me stop the recording.
Sounds good.
For all of that. Hold on, if I can figure out how to do that. Okay, well, everyone else can go ahead and sign off. I'll see you all next time. And I do see the stop recording button, so bye everyone.